Board President, we are streaming.
Thank you. Welcome to the Board of Education meeting. I call this meeting to order. I want to remind those speaking tonight that we do use the closed captioning function on YouTube, so please speak as clearly as possible. Now I ask that you stand if able and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance in English and in Spanish. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic for which it stands. Thank you. We will next move on to our acknowledgement of tribal lands. We gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose homelands we gather, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. Next, I'd like to ask for a moment of silence for those who have given their lives in service to this country. Okay, we will move on to our roll call. Dr. Albright, can we have a roll call, please?
Josefina Dominguez.
Here.
Heather Benavides.
Here.
Ronaldo Tomorito.
Here.
Danielle Gonzalez.
Here. Our first item is to consider adoption of the June 18th, 2025 Board of Education meeting agenda. As a reminder, per the APS Board of Education Governance Manual, board members can ask that an item be removed from the consent agenda before the meeting agenda is posted, but not during the meeting. Is there a motion and a second?
I move that we adopt the June 18th, 2025 Board of Education meeting agenda. This is Board Member Benavides.
I second. This is Josefina Dominguez.
Great, thank you. We have a motion and a second. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Josefina Dominguez.
Yes.
Heather Benavides.
Yes.
Ronaldo Tomorito.
Yes.
Danielle Gonzalez.
Yes. Our next item is public forum. Member Benavides, will you please share the instructions for public forum?
Right. So welcome to our public forum guests. When you signed up to speak, you were asked to review rules and expectations, which our presiding officer will enforce. The New Mexico Public Meetings Act requires that our agenda specify in advance the items that will be discussed and voted on during the meeting. Therefore, public forum isn't a dialogue among speakers and board members, but rather a chance to hear from our community. We will call participants to speak in the order they signed up, whether in person or virtual. Those here with us tonight will be asked to come to the microphone at the back of the room when their name is called. Online guests will stay in a virtual waiting room until it is their turn to speak. We have set aside 45 minutes for public forum. If there are 22 or fewer speakers, you will each have 2 minutes to speak. Otherwise, you will have 1 minute. Tonight, we have how many speakers? 10 speakers. Thank you, Christy. Once your time is up, you will be asked to quickly wrap up. And if you feel unable to convey your message, you may email the board at boarded@aps.edu. In addition, for those of you here tonight, a representative from our service center is here to assist you if necessary. Thank you so much.
Thank you, board member. Our first speaker this evening is in the room, and it is Janet Sayers, and she will be followed by Janet Harmon. Make sure.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, and soon to be leaving Associate Superintendent or Deputy or whatever you are. Anyway, okay. So actually I was going to have commented on something different tonight until I took a better look at the agenda, and I thought maybe tonight would be an appropriate time to just say something about long-range coordination between the City of Albuquerque's library program and literacy, since you'll be looking at the progress monitoring reports for the early literacy. I now have the opportunity to serve on the library advisory board for the city and the county, And that would be, that represents 19 library branches spread across Bernalillo County. And actually, the summer reading program has this wonderful theme of color my world. And there are daily activities to make reading fun, enjoyable. There's dancing, there's music, there's puppets, there's anyway, a lot of things. And I looked at the local government advisory board, of which member Benavides and member Jackson are on, and just thinking that at some point we need to make sure that our public library programs are complementing things that are happening with some of our school programs and the summer reading program that New Mexico PED is putting on. So I'm going to put on my thinking cap about that and try to, I want our library board to actually take this up as an agenda item later this summer and look at better coordination with how APS is following a lot of these topics. So thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next speaker is Janet Harmon, and that will be followed by Beatrice Pacheco. Janet Harmon, is that you?
Hi,
You have-
good
You have 2 minutes. I'm sorry.
Okay. Hi, I'm here to thank the board for not renewing the contract with the Council of Great City Schools. I'd also like to question the need for this model, hiring out-of-state coaches. Is it mandated to have this sort of contract? As we've seen, it takes an enormous amount of time vetting these outfits, many of whom have questionable motives when it comes to true, equitable public education. I encourage you to investigate funding sources for the CGCS. Likewise, any outside group will always need to be educated about New Mexico. The Martinez and Yazzie decision is the most concrete example of New Mexico's unique situation. We have an immense amount of knowledge right here in our community. Each of you have been educators, parents, or students in APS. Our esteemed superintendent, who's not here, is even the daughter of a well-respected past board president. Continuously, we have heard from the APS community. We have heard the APS community voice concerns and offer solutions at these board meetings. Somewhere in your archives, you have an excellent family engagement policy drafted by Families United for Education. Don't shelve what you already have. At the last meeting, you were advised to fully implement restorative justice practices and to fortify the instructional councils. Let's do it. I was a parent who served multiple years on the IC at my son's school, and I'm happy to share my experience and what the roadblocks that are presented to families who want to be involved. Let's see. Board members should also be allowed to visit schools in their district at any time. Please lift the gatekeeping around this. I had to make this longer. Anyways, the whole dialogue about coaching and gobbledygook rubrics is just a distraction from the urgency of what needs to be done and does not serve to increase student outcomes. You were elected because your constituents put their faith in you to do the job and serve. Thank you.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Beatrice Pacheco, followed by Joe Cardillo. And you'll have 2 minutes once you begin speaking. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Beatrice Pacheco, Director of Education for the Pueblo of Sandia. I have also worked as a reading specialist and Director of Special Education in large urban school districts. I would like to respond to Superintendent Blakey's interpretation of the iStation data and to speak to the effectiveness of iStation and iReady as reading interventions for low-performing readers, as identified in the 2000 National Reading Panel report, which was the last wide-scale national reading report conducted in the U.S. Superintendent Blakey indicated in her analysis of the data that the challenge for the next school year is to implement instructional practices in our first grade classrooms that enables this group of students to maintain and exceed the level of achievement that was demonstrated at the middle of the school year, when 24.8% of first grade students in this group were proficient or above in overall reading ability. Proficiency dipped at the end of the year to 23.2%. It is also noted that the Yazzie Martinez subgroup shows limited gains across the year, with most students performing below proficiency benchmarks. I would like for the board to seek clarification on how iStation and iReady were chosen as appropriate tools for mitigating reading deficits for low achieving readers. If you review the U.S. government What Works Clearinghouse, supported by the Institute of Education Sciences, you will find only one valid peer-reviewed quasi-experimental study regarding iStation outcomes. There was only a marginally significant difference found between the two groups, and the effect size of the program was determined to be 0.06. According to Hattie's effect, 0.4 is the hinge point, and that would equate a small effect size, meaning that it would be what would be expected over the course of one school year. A program with a 0.06 effect size should have been questioned by the school board before tax dollars were spent to purchase the program. It's important to note that overuse of technology in the classroom takes time away from traditional reading instruction, which can produce medium to large effect sizes. And finally, I would suggest that the board ask to see the research behind the suggestions being made for curriculum changes, particularly when they entail purchasing expensive programs, which are technology-based. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Joe Cordillo. Okay. You'll have 2 minutes once you begin speaking, sir.
Good evening, board members. Good evening, board president, deputy superintendent. My name is Joe Cardillo. I'm a resident of APS District 4, and I had a chance to attend the last meeting. And something that my board member said kind of caught my eye during the CGCS conversation. She said that essentially she didn't feel that this group was acting like a team, that there was a lack of teamwork. And I'm actually an executive coach. I work for a local nonprofit, but I also do executive coaching. I do leadership training and communications training. I don't work with school boards, but certainly familiar with all of the leadership challenges that come with large organizations. And that really caught my eye. So I went back and watched several of the recent school board meetings. I also went back and looked at some documentation and tried to get a better understanding of the CGCS contract and what that relationship was like as best I could. And I want to say something, which is that in the corporate and sort of tech world where I've worked a lot, folks talk a lot about teamwork, but there's a lot of issues that come up there, which I'm not going to go into here in this forum. One of the biggest pieces that happens is that folks don't work as a team. They don't work together, and there's often not a culturally responsive approach to leadership. And as I go back and sort of look at some of those meetings that have happened, I think a lot of that's pretty evident here. I think there's really a lack of leadership, and I'm not making a comment on the intent of any of the board members or any of the leadership here. I'm simply saying that the behaviors that I observed really fell short of what we would expect from a school district that represents taxpayers, that represents teachers, educators, school staff, and parents. Most of us, I've been an educator in a very, very far away former life. Most of us know that our kids, they watch what we say, but they really watch what we do. And so I would encourage this board to really listen closely, especially to what board member Dominguez and board member Tomé Morito had to say, because I think they really offered a lot of insight about what we can do to be better and more responsive, because our kids truly do watch what we do, and that concludes this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Megan Long, and Megan will be on Zoom. Megan, you have 2 minutes once you begin speaking.
Okay, thank you. Hello, I'm an APS parent in District 3, and I'm here today to voice my concern about the RFP process as it stands to replace the CGCS coaching. I think it has been negligent, and in a time when the budget is at the highest threshold, we need to ask ourselves why the constituents are being left out of the conversation. Is it intentional? And if so, how can this be remedied? We expect inclusion and transparency going forward and not further division sowed by certain members on the board. I didn't expect to have this much time, so forgive me. But I think what we're really looking for is some clear communication. We'd like to move forward united with parents actually being involved and included. That is, I think, our biggest concern at the moment, given the current state of affairs. We'd like to see people take responsibility for their part in this situation that we find ourselves in. It makes me think of something that I often say to my own children when we're playing with others or in a shared space. If you help make the mess, then I expect you to help clean it up. So the job moving forward here is to make things better by listening to the voices that are speaking, listening to the people that want to be heard and reaching out even further into the community so that we make sure that we are actually coming at this from a well-rounded approach and not just listening to the pundits, to people who have their very own private interests involved. We want something that is going to be equitable for our community, and we strive to keep public education public. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next speaker is in the room, Mary Herrera. You'll have 2 minutes once you begin speaking.
Okay, thank you. So good evening, Madam President, school board members, and superintendent. My name is Mary Walker Herrera, and I am here to speak on children's health and wellness. Executive Order 14168, signed by President Trump in January of 2025, mandates that federal agencies recognize gender as an immutable male-female binary, determined by biological sex at conception. It also halted funding for gender-affirming care and the promotion of quote-unquote gender ideology or a spectrum of gender identities. Transgender is an umbrella term for people whose gender identity differs from the sex which was determined at conception. Medical transitioning can be a key part. This means hormone treatments, gender-affirming surgeries, complex plastic surgery procedures that can change a person's face, chest, or genitals. A range of medical professionals are needed, as well as primary care physicians and advanced practice clinicians. Therapists also to help in mental transitioning. Since the Executive Order 14168 has been signed, there is no longer funding. Children as well as teens will need treatment and counseling to help in their detransitioning. As school board members, I ask that you provide the necessary assistance within the APS system to guide and orient these children and young teens to detransition through counselors, social workers, teachers, and principals. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you. Our next speaker is on Zoom, Dr. Sinello.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can, sir. You have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Madam President and school board members and superintendent. Thank you for serving. We the people commemorate Juneteenth, a holiday that celebrates the end of slavery in the United States after the Civil War. Did you know there's 4 points? The number one is on June 19, 1865, Union soldiers arrived in Galveston, Texas, to proclaim to the remaining slave African American that the Emancipation Proclamation signed by Republican President Abraham Lincoln had secured their freedom, that all Black slaves are free. Number two, Lincoln, alongside the Republican Party, then succeeded in passing the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery in America, despite harsh opposition from the Democratic Party. Number three, they championed the 14th Amendment, granting citizenship to African Americans, and the 15th Amendment, which extended the right to vote to African American men. Number four, Juneteenth is also known as Freedom Day, a day of liberty and justice that underscores the Republican Party's founding mission to uphold the principle embedded in our Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. And that's what I call a legal constitutional immigration. That said, elections have consequence, and looking forward to ending the sex slavery, not sex trafficking, in this country, in this county, state, and USA. We the people wish everyone in New Mexico and our APS, the county and New Mexico, a very happy, blessed Juneteenth. And so thank you. May God bless APS and New Mexico.
Thank you. Our next speaker is in person, Nina Simbana. And Nina will be followed by David Ames. You'll have 2 minutes, ma'am.
Hello, good evening. Thank you, members of the board and Deputy Superintendent. I am an APS parent who's here today to acknowledge that the board is rethinking the process for hiring out-of-state contractors to coach the board. The community urges the board to slow down this process and open it to public comment. This will go a long way to make sure we aren't led down a road of quote-unquote missteps. The board and APS leadership should know that the community has grown tired of APS's continued missteps. By APS's own admission, they misstepped how the right sizing of Taft unfolded. they misstepped notifying families of the sewage spill at Harrison Middle School. So of course, we are asking questions about the contract with the Council of Great City Schools because we are wondering if this will be the next misstep. The last board meeting was telling, but perhaps not in the way that was intended. I want to remind those listening, this contentious contract dictates how the board governs and how the superintendent meets her goals and keeps her job. So although it might not be a huge part of the budget, it weighs heavily on how the entire district operates. So how is it that the initial contract was ever approved as an open-ended agreement? And why did it not go through a professional services agreement channels to begin with? How was it that the renewal contract passed approval without being presented to the board? The board president tried to say the whole board approved the renewal. Then she said it happened in executive committee, then in a meeting with the superintendent. Which is it, and where is the proof? We have questions and we expect answers. We demand an accountable and public process from APS as a whole. As a reminder to board leadership, we need our school district to function in terms of equity, especially for students identified in the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit. Equity and trust. This is not a corporate boardroom. This is the people's boardroom, and our children are who you serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is David Ams. And you'll have 2 minutes once you begin speaking, sir.
Hi, I'm here to offer my support for the student outcomes focused governance model and for the use of an aligned coaching vendor such as the Council of Great City Schools. On the agenda for tonight's meeting is an in-depth discussion of the progress monitoring results in early literacy for our district's most vulnerable populations, our Yazzie Martinez groups, our underserved groups, people like myself when I was a kid. Nowadays, you'd say, as a kid, I was economically disadvantaged. However, when I was a kid, peers and adults just called me a poor kid. But then back then, we didn't have school boards specifically evaluating the progress of kids like me. It honestly didn't feel like people cared, but tonight we're going to see something pretty amazing. We're going to see a school board discuss an evaluation of the progress for kids like I was and other underserved groups. This board is going to show that they actually care about kids and whether they, no matter where they're from, and that they can read. This wasn't happening before student outcomes focused governance. Kids like I was, we were talked about in the abstract, but we're never given an intentional focus on how our education can be improved. I want to thank this board for this intentional work and encourage you to block out the noise of those who would distract you from this important work. Stay the course with student outcomes focused governance, please. Your community requested this. Your community still supports this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Tanya Hopkins, and I believe she is on Zoom. Tanya, are you there?
I am. Thank you.
You have 2 minutes once you begin speaking.
Good evening. I'm a level 3 APS elementary music teacher, also licensed in special education. I'm a parent of 2 APS students and an ATF representative. Because elementary music teachers have been itinerant, I've observed what student outcomes focused governance looks like in a variety of diverse schools. And I urge the board to keep what works from SOFG while expanding their oversight and influence to address the dynamic needs of their constituents. We can no longer contact our board members directly, and I wonder if it makes a difference to share concerns with board members now that board work is so closely policed and limited to the confines of this Council of Great City Schools framework. I attended the community listening sessions when the goals and guardrails were being created, and it was not made clear to the community that the priorities we shared would result in high-stakes assessments, become virtually the only work the board could address, and be the sole criteria for evaluating our superintendent. An example of a community concern that may not be receiving enough attention at board meetings is school safety. This issue is not a part of our progress monitoring, and I have observed schools putting more resources into compliance with the Goal 4 survey than actually creating a climate of safety. Please include educator and parent voice in this important issue. Focus on measurable outcomes is important, but by limiting board work to measuring static goals and guardrails and giving all of the implementation decisions to the district leadership, Our democratic voice is silenced. Thanks to all of you for your hard work on behalf of all of our students.
Thank you. And Board President Gonzalez, board members, that completes public forum.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez, and thank you to our public forum speakers. We will move on to our next item, which is to consider acceptance of progress monitoring reports for interim goals 1.1 and 1.2 for early literacy. Our presenters are Dr. Antonio Gonzalez, Deputy Superintendent for Learning, Leadership and Learning, and Sherry Jett, our Chief Academic Officer. And our facilitator for this discussion is Member Dominguez. I'll turn it over to you, Member Dominguez.
Thank you. So tonight we are monitoring Goal 1 and interim goals 1.1 and 1.2, measuring proficiency in literacy in first and second grade students, targeted in the Martinez and Yazzie populations, plus African Americans. For the public's understanding, the Martinez and Yazzie groups include children with disabilities, Native American students, English language learners, and socially and economically disadvantaged children under the Title I federal program. The most vulnerable in the Title I program tend to be children in foster care, children and families who are unhoused, and LGBTQ plus students that fall in many of the vulnerable categories. The APS governance team added African American students because this group also faces academic challenges. Before we hear before we have our progress monitoring questions and conversation, we need to confirm that our monitoring report is complete. On Tuesday, June 10th, I met with Council of Great City Schools coach, Sendel Revoluri, to review the progress report, at that point a draft. I want to thank him for being a focused thought partner in preparation for my meeting with Dr. Gonzalez and Chief of Staff, Ms. Johanna King, later that day. The administrative team and I reviewed the draft report and had a productive conversation. My charge as facilitator is to evaluate the draft interim report for the following structural elements. The data. Does the report include a clearly labeled line graph showing results from the 3 prior reporting periods? Yes, for the aggregate population. And what I mean by that is the total of the groups that I just listed, but not for the disaggregated populations listed previously. Is the graph easy to interpret and aligned with specific goal or interim goal language? No. Without the disaggregated populations reality, we cannot know where they stand. In fact, both interim goals show a decline in year-over-year performance. And if the decline continues, we will not meet the interim literacy goal of 1.1. The monitoring report cites a lack of support and resources for data-driven small group instruction and the implementation of a new curriculum as causes for a year-over-year decline in early literacy. Couple this with an anemic annual targets for interim guardrails 5.1, professional development, and 5.2, adequate resources for educators to do their job. And that was on June 4th, we had that progress monitoring session. Well, the situation sets up teachers and by extension, our students to fail. I point this out because it is my duty as a facilitator who has had extensive conversations with Mr. Revoluri about this. To meet the standard we as a board agreed to. I highlight these areas of concerns so that the board in its questioning and the district in its strategic planning can make adjustments now while there is time to right the ship. And that's the purpose of the progress monitoring sessions. Are the target reporting periods and annual goal benchmarks clearly marked? Yes, for the aggregate data. Interpretation of the data. Does the superintendent offer a clear interpretation of system performance based on the data? No. I do not have enough information to assure the board that we are on track for all the reasons stated above. Is the interpretation directly tied to the stated goal or interim goal? No. If we cite Martinez and Yazzie plus African Americans, we should graph their standing relative to the aggregate data. Under evidence and plan, if progress is not on track, has the administration identified a root cause? Yes, several, 6, which I suggested was not targeted enough. A clear plan to get back on track? No. Clarity is tied to rationale. And I pointed out that the rationale was missing during the facilitator meeting with Dr. Gonzalez, and it is still missing because the report has not been revised. A rationale for why those actions are expected to be effective. No, there is no existing evidence in the report that bolsters the claims made in the planned actions that inspire confidence that these plans will work. If progress is on track and it's not, I'm going to skip those because they don't apply. Again, I requested in this meeting the disaggregated data for each of the student groups shared earlier. I made the same request several months ago in October of 2024 when I facilitated the math report. We have been missing graph data points for the populations referenced in our goals. We need to see how the most vulnerable students, what I referred to as the disaggregated populations listed earlier, compare to the total vulnerable population, what I referred to as the aggregate population data points that appear on today's graph. I also want to clarify that the superintendent, and this is important, the superintendent is evaluated on the aggregate and not the disaggregated graphs. To provide 5 different evaluations would be unwieldy. Nonetheless, I believe the board collectively agreed to be responsible for holding the district to high standards and structural integrity. This requires seeing the disaggregated information graphed against the aggregate. It is important for transparency and for honest conversation that leads to the best possible student outcomes for those students who are not progressing. It also promotes and guides successful root cause analysis and culturally and linguistically rich solutions. The lack of rationale and the lack of focused root cause analysis makes it difficult for the board to understand the reality of the very groups struggling to show growth: students with disabilities, Native American students, English language learners, and African Americans. We want this to be an effective monitoring session. I want that. So we will proceed to try to make it so in light of the missing rationales for so many root causes. In future sessions, the expectation is to have the disaggregated data graphed against the aggregated data, which would provide board members an opportunity to ask more effective strategic questions, which would lead to a more effective monitoring session. Are we in agreement that we can proceed to try to make this an effective session?
Member Dominguez?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. I think based on your overview there, it sounds like the answer to that is no. You articulated why you believe the required elements of the report are not present. And so because of that, I'd like to make a motion that we postpone the progress monitoring session to a later date.
Okay, I understand. I had an extensive conversation with Sendel Reveluri about this particular point today, and I am taking his suggestion that that we can try to make this an effective session, but I certainly I raise the same questions that you are raising now. So I hear you. Board Member Benavides?
I appreciate President Gonzalez's suggestion because I think it gives the administration the time to revise their reports. And I am on board for that.
Okay, thank you. And
can I second the motion?
well,
Or
should
Yes,
we?
or you could do.
Okay. Yeah, I would like
Well,
to.
I would like to hear from
Oh, okay. And we can go on to
Board Member Tom Morito.
I do agree. And the reason for that is I know specifically when we addressed the questions earlier, I felt like the answers were not to the satisfaction of digging deeper. I think after a year, we should be able to really look at some of those root causes. Because if they're starting in first grade, especially with chronic absenteeism, when you look at the dashboard and the effects chronic absenteeism, not only in elementary, middle school, and high school, but it's a repeated start. And I really want to know how we're going to take a look at that. So I do agree that we should take another look at this at another time.
So we do have a motion and a second to postpone the consideration of the progress monitoring report to a later date. I want to capture the rationale for why we would do so. So what is missing? What would be needed to be included in the report? So what I heard from you, Member Dominguez, is what's missing is the rationale for why the actions that the administration has proposed are expected to address the root causes identified in the report.
Correct. There's also a lack of focus. We have 6 root causes. And again, during having my thought partner and I discuss this, we felt there's, and I mentioned this in the meeting, if we could prioritize, 6 is, I think it lends, we need to focus those 6 on the most relevant.
Well, so, okay. So the 6 are the root causes. So if they've identified those as the root causes, what we're asking for is rationale for why the strategies are expected to address those root causes. And you're suggesting that the strategies and planned action should be more focused.
I'm saying that we can't do 6 root causes. I mean, or you have to prioritize, you have to be more focused about your root causes.
Okay. I don't think we can tell the district that they can't focus on one thing or another, but what I'm noting is in order to proceed with the report, it does need to include rationale for why the actions are expected to address the root causes.
Okay.
Okay. So with that, we have a motion and a second to postpone the progress monitoring session. Member Dominguez, it looks like you want to get in with one more comment before we move to.
So I did prepare an analysis of, strengths and promising elements, and gaps and concerns. So the strengths, or the acknowledgement of root cause, the fatigue, and specifically fatigue and engagement, assessment fatigue and engagement. Instructional suggestions like more strategic use of technology, an effort to humanize assessment practice, and reference to screen time guidelines. Those were the strengths. The gaps and concerns have to do with, first, no direct link to vulnerable, the disaggregated vulnerable student populations. No clear plan for implementation or monitoring impact. Strategies are offered as recommendations, but there's no actionable plan with time, and I'm happy to share this. So I'll give you the details in writing. 3, minimal parent community engagement. 4, lack of data on actual screen time. And 5, no evidence of adjustments to strategy based on progress monitoring.
Thank you for the additional context. Dr. Albright, we have a motion and a second to postpone the consideration of the progress monitoring report to a later meeting. I believe the next possible later meeting would be August 6th, if I'm looking correctly. So we'd be postponing till August 6th, which would provide, I hope, ample time. Dr. Gonzalez, does that work for the administration to be able to respond to the request for rationale for why actions are expected to address the root causes, along with more focus and prioritization and a clear actionable plan?
Madam President, yes, it will, and we will be ready.
Great, thank you. So can we have a roll call vote, please?
Josefina Dominguez,
Yes, I'm happy to join a consensus.
Heather Benavides,
Yes.
Bernardo Tomorito,
Yes.
Daniel Gonzalez.
Yes, so the motion to postpone carries. We will move on now to consider approval of the consent agenda. This is for items 6.1 through 6.23. Is there a motion and a second? Let's see, where are we? I move to accept approval of, or I move to approve the consent agenda. Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second. Board Member Benavides.
Thank you. We have a motion from Member Dominguez and a second from Member Benavides. Can we please have a roll call vote, please?
Josefina Dominguez,
Yes.
Heather Benavides,
Yes.
Bernardo Tomorito,
Yes.
Daniel Gonzalez.
Yes, so the motion to approve the consent agenda carries. And we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is agenda item 6, which is the president's report. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that although public forum is not an opportunity for dialogue, we do want each speaker to know that you were heard and we are working with the administration on resolutions. Some of the issues that we heard tonight were regarding progress monitoring and reading instruction, board support, community engagement, leadership, RFP process, and children's health and wellness. I also want to acknowledge that this has been a heavy week in our country and in our community. And as we sit here trying to transform education for our community, it's important to acknowledge this is a moment when people are being disappeared across the country, disappeared from our streets, and kids are afraid to go to school. Kids are afraid to attend their graduation ceremonies. Families and employees are afraid to go to work. They're afraid to go to stores. And elected officials are not just being detained, but murdered. So I just want to acknowledge that as we sit here and how committed I know this board is collectively to working together to address the challenges in our education system, to transform and improve education, but also to address the challenges in our democracy. For that, I think it's important that we continue to acknowledge the students are our focus and that we ensure we stick to that. Along with high quality coaching, along with high quality support, but an important acknowledgement of just where this world and this community is this week. That concludes the president's report. Our next Board of Education meeting will be Wednesday, July 16th, 2025 at 5:00 p.m. here in the Alice and Bruce King Educational Complex at 6400 Uptown Boulevard Northeast and live streamed at aps.edu. And with that, the meeting is adjourned.